Welcome to Martini Time. This is, it's almost my favorite time of the day. When we can have this chat. I've been writing on Facebook all day. It's amazing. I haven't, time passed by. Didn't even take a nap. I don't know where the energy comes from. I mean, I get up in the morning and I meditate and I come down and I read and then I do my morning's talk and then I write and expound on that talk and then I comment and make more comments and write. And it just flows out all day. And here I am again. My talking here is like writing. It just flows out. So, and it's not the gin. It is the gin. Oh, that was dangerous. Oh, excuse me. Okay. I wanted to talk about the benefits of mindfulness. That's funny. The benefits of mindfulness. Okay, well, I don't think I really formally set out to practice mindfulness. And because I've been in the practice of yoga and been on the spiritual path on and off since 1968 and before, say 1960. I'm in 1957. That's when it started, when I was in the submarines and I was reading Thomas Merton and the Seven-Story Mountain. I think that's when I got the kicker. You know, in Inception, if you remember the movie, when they went into the dream, there had to be a kicker or so they could wake up. And the kicker was falling back. If you fell back in the dream, you would wake up. A fallback, a surprise, an astonishment. And so I think I got that kicker with Thomas Merton. And then my life has been one kicker after another. So I had a big kicker in 2005 when I just wanted to meditate for no reason at all. So I just began to meditate every morning, hour, half hour, then an hour. And so there was no gaining idea in that. And then I got in, and then I began to practice Yoga Nidra, and it's on my website. It's a guided meditation. It's a form of guided mindfulness. And so the meditation and the Yoga Nidra, and I began to teach Yoga Nidra at the Lifelong Learning Institute in Richmond. And then I began to study and listen to, Eckhart Tolle was a big kicker. And then I discovered Rodney Smith at the Seattle Insight Meditation Society, sims.org, and he's been teaching mindfulness and his talks are on the website. And I began to listen to him in the car, in my office, and I'm still listening to him. So I've been having this study going on, these kicking studies, that give me a wake up. So I've been doing that constantly, along with meditation. And then I did begin to, practice mindfulness with an effort. Now, the practice of mindfulness is basically being aware of what you're doing. Being aware of what your body's doing and then what your mind is doing. But it starts out with the body. So you're walking across the floor to get some coffee, and instead of just letting your mind go to the coffee and something else, you become aware of walking. You become aware of the energy in your hands. You become aware of the way your body posture is going. When you're at Walmart, instead of just worrying about this or that or just letting the mind, it's like when you take your dog out. Now, if the dog is trained, it's going to heel. If the dog isn't trained, it's just going to pull you everywhere, sniffing this. Well, the untrained mind just sniffs everything out. It just sniffs every turd. just gets into trouble. You don't know where it's going. So mindfulness in the beginning is kind of like putting a leash on it, a leash of awareness. And you make the intention, you have the intention to become aware of what you're doing. So if you're making tea, you become aware of the process of making tea. If you're washing dishes, you become aware of washing dishes. Just the sensation of it. Just the raw feeling. Not thinking about it, but the raw feeling. So that's where it begins. Just being aware of being in life, in the raw sensation of it. The smells, the hearing, the feeling, the sounds, without judgment, without labeling. Just noticing, without blaming, without inquiry, without commenting, just noticing. Oh, just noticing. And then that mindfulness begins to move towards the mind. And now you begin to notice what the mind is doing in the same way what you noticed what the body was doing. But the first so this is the first stage is noticing the body. Then you begin to notice feelings, emotions. Oh, I noticed this depression. I noticed this irritation. I noticed this tension. Isn't that interesting? I noticed this. And then you notice emotions. I notice, and this gets more difficult, I notice anger. And you notice thinking. Thoughts go across the mind and you notice them. You don't go with them. You can't notice the thought and go with it at the same time. That's the thing. If you go with it, it's kind of like you take off with the thought and you go where the thought wants to go, and you're off in Miami thinking about the beach or something, or you're daydreaming, or you're somewhere else, or you're worried about this, and you're caught up in a little mental hurricane, woo, 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 and you notice that. And the noticing is kind of like the ground over which the hurricane goes, and it begins to lose strength. So this noticing is kind of like the ground of the mind that notices the mental storms going over it. And the noticing, just like the ground dissipates the hurricane after it leaves the warm water of the ocean, the noticing dissipates the mind's little whirlpools and big hurricanes. Your mind is just little whirlpools like you see with a little dust storm or leaves, like that. A little mini tornado. You say, oh, look at that, you see. That's thinking. Or then you have a larger storm. Or then you have a tornado, which might be a violent anger temper tantrum, where you destroy something, you see. So this noticing is like the ground over which the hurricane loses its strength, because the noticing doesn't support it. When you notice something going on in your mind, you're not identifying with it. You can't identify with a thought and notice it at the same time. Think about that. You can't identify. You can't invest in a thought as me and notice it at the same time. Okay, I didn't cough. Okay, so you get the idea that mindfulness now is the intention to be awake. Now what's wrong with that? You got a choice, be asleep or be awake. If you're asleep, you're just suffering for no understandable reason. And you have nightmares, worry storms, and life becomes Groundhog Day. You can't wake up. Everything's the same. Everything is repeating itself. Different form, different place, but the same feelings, the same thoughts, the same worries. I notice that. And if you notice that, then that's the first step of mindfulness. If you notice that you're repeating yourself, that your life is boring, that it's not going anywhere, that it's no longer fresh, there's no passion, there's no creativity, there's no energy, it's just boring humdrum, and you find yourself, drinking or just dozing out on TV or getting angry and getting into arguments. That's exciting. You see, if you notice that, that's mindfulness. If you notice that, that's the first step in curiosity. I want to see more of that. This is interesting. I want to go into it. So now that begins to grow into a practice, and then you maybe find some books on mindfulness, meditation. Amazon's full of it. Internet's full of it. Mindfulness is mainstream. Corporations are teaching it. Mindfulness is happening. It's kind of like the next step of yoga. Yoga is physical mindfulness of the body. Mindfulness is mindfulness of the mind. So they move evolutionary together, and you move with them as you're ready. But when you begin the practice of mindfulness now, the first stage, as I said, has two stages. One is being mindful or aware of the body sensations, which you can do anywhere. Nobody knows you're doing it. Waiting for a bus, sitting somewhere, you're aware of sounds. When you're in Walmart, you have the intention to practice mindfulness. So when I'm in Walmart now, instead of just letting the mind wander around sniffing this and that, I'm going to be aware of my body movements. And if I start thinking and complaining, I become aware of that. So for that little time in Walmart, I've got to practice. So you just do the practice in your life, you see. This is what's happening today in American yoga and American Buddhism, is that these traditions in India were monastic traditions. Just like Catholicism has a monastic tradition. Thomas Merton was a monastic. He became a monk. And in order for him to become mindful, he went to a monastery. Buddhism was a monastic tradition when it started. For the first 500 years, it was Theravada Buddhism, monastic Buddhism. You had to be a monk to practice Buddhism. You had to leave the world and go in a monastery. Leave all your wealth and everything. Same with Catholicism, the monastic tradition in Catholicism. But now we live in a secular world. You can't be a monastic. Can't go live in a monastery. Oh, you can, but who's going to do that? You see, you still got to eat. And then, too, there's sex and all that, you see. So how do you live in the world and be a monastic? How do you live in the world and be a renunciate? How do you do that? Well, we're doing it through yoga and mindfulness. Yoga is a practice where for 20 minutes or an hour during the day, you're going to be a monastic. You leave your shoes at the door. You leave the world at the door. And you just become mindful of the body. And then meditation moves you to mindful of the mind. So when you meditate, you are being a monastic in the sense that you have created a little monastery, a little retreat, your 20 minutes, where you just sit and notice what the mind is doing without identifying with it. So you learn how to notice in meditation. And then mindfulness makes your monasticism portable. Now you can be a portable secret monastic, you see. Now, when you're shopping, when you're doing housework, when you're taking care of the kids, whatever you're doing, you can notice, you can practice and notice what your mind and body is doing. Now this goes to the next. So we're kind of like looking at the stages here. So this yoga and this meditation, formal meditation, and this effort of mindfulness requires intention and effort. I mean, you have to make time or make an effort to do it. You have to go to the yoga class, do your yoga, sit for meditation. That takes effort. And then if you practice mindfulness, the portable mindfulness, which you will do if you evolve from the other two. The two formal practices are yoga and sitting for meditation. That will evolve into the portable mindfulness, where you bring your mindfulness into your everyday world, you see. And that takes effort to begin with there. You got to remember to do it. But the next stage is miraculous. The next stage is when your mindfulness becomes automatic. It becomes just what you do. So you don't have to make effort. You don't have to remember. That's who you are. You are mindfulness, you see. And that begins to tap into the inexhaustible spring of inner energy and creativity. So I'm not tooting my horn here, but I'm 80 years old and I've tapped into it. That's how I can sit here and write creative writing for, since 7 o'clock this morning. I do this every day. It's just what I do. It's not like, I've got to do it. It's just what I do, So I'm really trying to share with you the fruit, the experience that I'm living, that this works. I went to have a physical the other day. Said, you're the healthiest 80-year-old I've ever seen. And I've got in my stable, you see. I take a vitamin and some vitamin D and a martini. And a little sipping scotch after dinner. So I feel okay about that because I was reading one of my favorite Zen masters, big Japanese abbot, and he, in one of his books, said, I like to have a few whiskeys before I go to bed. And I said, okay, that's all right. But when mindfulness becomes free, you're free. Because you notice everything. There are no more, I shouldn't think that, or why am I doing this, or no more judgment, because you notice judgment. There's no more worry, because you notice worry. There's no more confusion, because you notice confusion. And when you notice it, you're not it. You get the idea? When you notice something, you're making your subjective mind that we used to live in and be lost in objective. Mindfulness makes your subjective thinker objective. And if it's objective, you're not it. But who are you? You don't know. That's the secret. You don't know who you are. If you know who you are, then you're identifying with a thought of who you are. If you're mindful, you notice the thought of who you are, so you're not that thought. You see how it goes? If you notice the thought of who you think you are, my opinions, my values, my religion, my philosophy, you see, my culture, all of that, if that's who you are, if you're practicing mindfulness, you notice that. Well, who's the noticer? Who is it that notices who you are? Who you are, then, is just a thought. And you notice it. And when you notice it, it begins to evaporate like the hurricane that goes over the ground. When the mind goes over the ground of mindfulness, it begins to break up all its forms, all of its opinions, all of its certainties, all of its philosophies. It doesn't mean you can't have opinions and philosophies and all that. It just means that you don't hold them seriously. You just hold them like a feather on the tongue, or an ice cube on the tongue, a snowflake on the tongue, you see. Mindfulness is the tongue. Snowflake is the thought. You see. So you don't stop thinking. It's just that you don't go with the thinking. You notice it like you'd notice snowflakes. Oh, look at the beautiful snowflake. Oh, look at the beautiful thought, you see. You notice thoughts coming up. You sit in meditation, you can watch thoughts coming up. They come up and they go, like bubbles on a pond. You don't go live in the bubble. If you do, your practice kicks in and you remember to see the bubble. If you become a bubble boy, practice kicks in and you see the bubble and it pops, poop. So this practice is liberation. This practice is just learning how to be totally here. And when you're here, you're going to be creative, you're going to be passionate, you're going to be joyous, and you're going to have a good time. And you're not going to have stress disorders because stress disorders come from the mind. If you're watching the mind, you don't identify with, there's no stress. If stress comes up, you say, oh, I notice it. If you notice the stress, you're not it. It goes poof. It can't stay. It can't sustain itself unless you identify with it. As soon as you say, I am worried, you're in the bubble. If you say, there is worry, poof, because you're not it. You're noticing it. But this noticer has no form. This noticer is no thing. This noticer is not even personal. The noticer is impersonal awareness. It's just aware. It's not judgment. It's not opinion. It has no reference to religion or scholars or authorities. It has no location. You can't find it on a Google map. You can't zoom in on it. You can't zoom out. It's formless. It's the eye of the hurricane that's nothing. Awareness and mindfulness is what Buddhism calls empty. Emptiness. But it's full because it's awareness. So, anyway, let's stop with that. Thank you for dropping in. And I'll see you tomorrow morning for Ideas That Can Change Your World. I'm changing the title of my morning talks. So drop in, share. I'm trying to increase my viewership. I think we have something worthwhile to share, these insight dialogues, which is what I call them, in which I share with you and discover, as we share, insights and ideas that can change yours and my life. So I'm not teaching you anything, I'm discovering something. And I do it with you real time. That's one of the fruits of mindfulness. Discovery, curiosity, an active and energetic mind that does not get trapped in boundaries and opinions and have opinion wars or arguments with other people. You have discussions, you have dialogue, but it's always moving towards greater understanding. So anyway, thanks for dropping in, and I'll see you in the morning.